Ah, yes, the familiar sound of Crazy Taxi, an old arcade staple from the Dreamcast and arcade era of gaming. That was a little before my time, but I do remember it being one of the first games I ever owned, and it was a port of Crazy Taxi on the Game Boy Advance of all places. There was just something so addicting about the gameplay, trying to chase your personal high scores, that I understand completely why it was the third best selling game on the Dreamcast ever. The slightly sad part of all of this was that Crazy Taxi became somewhat of a forgotten IP from Sega. There was a Crazy Taxi 2 and 3 released right on the heels of the original, but the franchise has only seen a couple spin offs since then in the last 20 years, all of which were significant departures from the classic Crazy Taxi formula. I really don't think games like Crazy Taxi Tycoon are something that too many people asked for, but I guess it is nice to know that the franchise isn't completely ignored. Anyways, this is all to say that when Taxi Chaos was announced in 2020, I was pretty hyped. A modern remake of Crazy Taxi, even if it is a blatant ripoff, is something that I could get behind. Finding out that this would be a full retail release also gave me a ton of hope for the game, so let's take a look at Taxi Chaos.
What is this driving style? You must have some pretty interesting stories from driving this taxi.
Oh yeah, that backseat upholstery has memories, man.
The premise of Crazy Taxi and Taxi Chaos is simple and essentially did not change in the 20-year gap between the titles. As an eccentric cab driver, you pick up passengers and deliver them to their destination as fast as possible. The faster you do so, the more money you make, and if you happen to pull off tricks and close calls along the way, you can even make more money in an effort to get a better grade on your license. This tried and true formula was perfect for its arcade roots and transitioned decently well, as you could expect, to consoles. Taxi Chaos was clearly afraid to try anything all too different, which initially seemed okay but ends up being part of a much larger problem. In fact, it becomes quickly apparent that after just a couple of play sessions, that this game takes several steps back in a lot of key areas, which we'll dive into right now.
Can you get me to the basketball court? Hold on.
I do want to take a moment here to go through the controls of Taxi Chaos, since the feeling of driving through a city at breakneck speeds is crucial to any Crazy Taxi style game. Unfortunately, this is where Taxi Chaos makes several missteps. The first of which is the complete lack of technical maneuvers. Even the original Crazy Taxi had you performing a decent variety of drifts and dashes that, once mastered, made the game a blast to weave in and out of traffic with. Later releases of the game added other mechanics like jumping and special braking, just to name a couple. Taxi Chaos unfortunately strips this down to simple turning, jumping, and a boost maneuver, and that's it. What is there feels okay, but the lack of driving depth grows stale quickly. Not being able to have the full freedom to drift through traffic dampens the entire experience and makes the game feel slow. Not to mention other vehicles themselves move at a snail's pace, which when paired to the rest of the semi-lifeless city really sucks the enjoyment out of driving. There is simply no satisfaction from nailing that perfect turn or successfully dodging other cars. It just misses the mark completely on what it should be going for. That being said, I did have some moments where I used the jump mechanic to successfully complete a shortcut, and I will say the game is at its best when that happened. It's just unfortunate how limited it is, which makes those moments few and far between.
What fun my kids are doing.
Hop in.
I need to go to the heliport, quick. Will do.
The entire package of Taxi Chaos also takes too many shortcuts that hurt the replayability of the game. The lack of game modes is depressing, especially after paying $35 for it. The only options are a traditional arcade mode, a pro mode which turns off the guiding arrow, which honestly should be a setting versus a whole new game mode, and then free roam. That's it. There are no mini games like any of the other Crazy Taxis, and very little to keep your interest. The fact that there's only one map and it's a fairly uninspired New York City clone means that you'll get bored of the scenery super fast. The game basically adds nothing interesting, especially by modern gaming standards, and ends up being an incredibly huge missed opportunity to create a fresh take on the experience. There is no multiplayer, no online other than a simple leaderboard, no gameplay variations, just the one flat map and relatively boring driving like I described earlier. All of that adds up to an incredibly uninspired cash grab that does nothing to mix up the Crazy Taxi formula and even strips away aspects that made the original so much fun.
Alright, let's go ahead and pick a car and drive it.
I'm not normally someone to complain about loading times in a video game, as I feel like people harp on that way too much sometimes, but man, does Taxi Chaos push me to my limits. The second I booted it up for the first time, I honestly knew I made a huge mistake. Every time the game turns on, it takes anywhere from 90 seconds to 2 minutes just to get to the main menu, and I have no idea why. What you're seeing here is in real time what happens when you start the game. What on planet Earth is causing this game to take so long to load? It's honestly baffling. For a game that's supposed to be as pick up and play as you can get, having it take several minutes to even start a session is incredibly frustrating, and just one more reason to take a hard pass on this Crazy Taxi clone.
Oh, you can tell? Sorry,
Yes.
Alright, so I know I'm railing on this game pretty hard, which to be fair is completely deserving of every criticism, but I will take a very brief moment to highlight some things I did like about it. First of which was the bright and sunny cartoon aesthetic works well. The city looks pretty good in my book, even if it is limited in creativity. I did also like the inclusion of collectibles. If you happen to pick up a specific passenger, you will unlock some challenges that require you to look around for 3 of something. They are pretty well hidden, and it forces you to drive through every shortcut you can find, or use the free roam mode, or jump off of strange buildings, and I found it quite chill just to take my time, aimlessly driving around looking for things to collect. At least it's something different. However, these things aren't exactly selling points, but it was just where I personally found some enjoyment, as little as that was.
3 different beard oil companies in business, so I'm good.
Hey!
Alright, so maybe I shouldn't have let myself get excited in the first place, but when it received a full retail release at a $35 price point, I got my hopes up pretty high for Taxi Chaos. It made sense to me. 20 years have passed since the last main Crazy Taxi game, and I figured the developers of this saw an awesome opportunity to jump on that, and were equally sick of waiting around for a modern sequel or remake, so they made their own. Well, I could not have been more wrong. Taxi Chaos masks itself in a nostalgic cologne to get your attention, only to suffocate you so you go crawling back to the original. And the fact that this game is being sold at $35 is an absolute insult to consumers. Essentially, Taxi Chaos is just feeding on that pure nostalgia and clever marketing to sell copies, and that's it. And it lacks any substance or style to back it up. It fails almost entirely on the most basic levels to even imitate the excitement of the original Crazy Taxi, let alone elevate it to modern standards. If you happen to have made it this far in the video and are still questioning whether you should purchase this game, please don't. It's not even in the "it's so bad it's good" category of games, since clearly some effort went into it, but it simply spits in the face of desperation of those who are waiting for a true Crazy Taxi sequel. Perhaps the entire Crazy Taxi series was a moment in time in gaming that can never again be duplicated, but I disagree. However, until then, I will be more than happy to play the original instead.
I'm the best.